Chapter 17 Graceful. Facing this new giant, Elle's immediate reaction was to run for their life. Their first and only experience with a giant was not a pleasant one, and they had no reason to believe this one would be any different. They wondered if they should trust her or not, as they stared back at her smiling face. The way she looked at Elle made her look like a caring and kind giant. She was much older than the giant man. Her wrinkles and gray hair reminded Elle of their grandmother that was still alive. Not the mean old granny that the snake was named after, but the nice one. Thinking back to their mother's words on how they shouldn't judge a book by its cover, Elle decided to trust their gut. A silly saying like that couldn't always be true, could it?
"I hope my son hasn't hurt you,"
she said, frowning.
"I'll explain everything. Why don't you come over and have a biscuit?"
she said, picking up a biscuit from her bedside table, putting it on a saucer, and placing it on the bed next to her. Elle hesitated at first, and then started towards her, running through the waves and folds of the blanket, sliding down some, and enjoying their short trek across the bed. It took a minute or two for them to reach the giant, as the bed was very long for their small size. When Elle reached the head of the bed, they sat down and broke off a piece of the biscuit and scarfed it down. It had been a while since Elle and Thea had anything to eat. They were interrupted from their delicious snake stew when the giant's bird came and took them away, leaving them very hungry. Anthea popped up from Elle's shirt and they handed her a large biscuit crumb, which she also ate quickly, but more gracefully than Elle, happy to finally get something in her empty stomach. The old giant sighed.
"I wanted to apologize for my son, Gregory. He hasn't been the same since his wife died. It all began when she got sick from a mysterious disease.
Gregory used to be a doctor. He tried to treat his wife at home after they decided they didn't want her to live her remaining days away from her house at the hospital. After she passed away, Gregory noticed the local animals and creatures suffering from the same symptoms, and he often found them dead throughout the forest. When he made that discovery, he trained his bird to locate animals with these symptoms and bring them to his home where he could test them and hopefully find a cure or reason for this disease. He had collected hundreds of bodies and sickly creatures, coming close to what he thought was the cause and finding a cure, only to fail and have those poor creatures die in his hands. If you hadn't noticed all of the jars of creatures in his basement, those were his failed attempts when trying to save or study them. He saves each body so that he can go back and test their DNA and find similarities between them, hoping to find a reason for the hundreds of deaths in the forest. The death of his wife drove him to madness. If you didn't notice, he keeps her body in the basement, constantly taking samples and hoping to find a link between her and the creatures. He doesn't want her death to be for naught. He wants to find a cure or the reason for this disease. He wants to stop the suffering in the forest. The obsession has driven him mad, causing him to do unthinkable things. I begged him to bury his poor wife and move on, but he cannot get over her death. Looking at it is driving him to madness every day. He works day and night, barely giving himself a moment of rest between his research. I wanted to apologize. It seems like his bird has mistaken you for the sickly. I'm glad you were able to escape. If you hadn't noticed, I too am sick and suffer from the same disease. He is fighting harder than ever to find a cure for my illness before he loses me too. As for me, I have accepted my fate. I have lived a long and full life, though I couldn't help but notice.
You have tracked quite a bit of dirt from the basement through the house."
Elle looked down at their dirty feet and tried to hide them.
"If you promise to help me clean up a bit, I will be more than happy to talk to Gregory about lending you his bird to take you wherever you came from,"
the old giant said, smiling at Elle once again and winking. Elle and Anthea looked at each other, grinning. They were relieved to find out their situation with the giant was all a misunderstanding and that they could soon be on their way. They both had the same idea. Instead of taking the bird to where they came from, why not take it straight to Aunt Witch's house? Giggling to each other, they looked at the giant lady and smiled, nodding in agreement.